So, and UKWA then in general. So, for those who maybe are not as familiar, like, what is UKWA and what do you offer for your members?
So we're a trade association, and that means that our members are companies, not individuals.
Okay.
We've got 1,000 member companies, and the majority of those are businesses that run a warehouse. So some of them are warehousing their own goods, probably more of them are third-party logistics. And we have a very simple 4-part mission of what we do for those businesses. So the first part is we are the voice of warehousing, and we talk about warehousing all the time. So I'm delighted to be here talking to you about it. But in particular, as I mentioned before, we love to talk to the government and the media and be a representative and explain, to the Freight Council at the Department for Transport or to the Department for Business and Trade about why it is that warehousing is important. The second part of our mission is to raise standards. So I know you said, your original background wasn't in logistics, but when I was coming up through the industry, everybody had to have a transport manager CPC. It's like a recognised qualification you've got to get. But there's nothing for warehousing. Last year, we launched the Warehouse Manager CPC, and this is part of the way that we help to raise standards, is by creating some brilliant high-quality education, a recognised qualification that just didn't exist before, and that's a good role for a trade body to help to raise standards like that. And, we've got various publications where we share best practice as well. The third part of our mission is to build community. We want it to feel like you're valued and you're important. If you're a person that works in warehousing, you're part of a community with us. We are the go-to network where you will find your tribe. And so that's the third part of our mission. And that goes along with item number 4, which is just to help our members. So my vision for the future is that if somebody's got some kind of tricky warehouse problem and they're not quite sure where to start, I would love them to immediately think, UKWA, that is the people who are going to help me. That's who I'm going to call because, we don't necessarily have all the answers, but we often have a good network where we can put people in touch with each other. And for example, on the topic of installing solar panels on warehouse rooftops, we were getting inquiries on that. We didn't know the answer. We couldn't find the answer. We ended up commissioning brand new research, which has been now quoted by academics and government bodies about why that's a problem and how you can go about it. So we're always here to help our members.
We had that challenge as well, and we probably tried to overcome it ourselves without probably knowing the services that you kind of offer there, because I was talking about that the other day, and by the end of this year, on certain facilities that we've got where it's actually feasible, we'll have solar on all of those facilities by the end of this year. Yeah.
It's really good news because in the UK at the moment, only about 5% of warehouses have any solar panels at all on the roof. And it's not good enough.
So I also understand that you also try and shape policies and stuff as well. Does that mean I don't know, are you in with the government? Do you have a seat at the table? How do you shape policy in general when some of it is actually driven from a government perspective? How does that work within your
Well, one of the challenges that we face is that in the run-up to the election in 2024, we produced our election manifesto with the things that we wanted from government, and we prioritised 8 asks of government. And disappointingly, we realised that these 8 things belong to 8 different government departments. So it does make it a bit complicated. So the starting point of our call on the government, and we're backed up by other trade bodies in this, for example, the Road Haulage Association, is that we believe there should be a logistics minister in the government to enable us to get that more joined up sense of what's going on. We haven't got that so far, but what we do believe is likely to happen this year is that when the industrial strategy comes out in June, logistics will be recognised as a foundational sector to support the so-called fashionable 8, the sectors which are named in the industrial strategy. And part of the way that we do that sort of lobbying activity is we sometimes do it in conjunction with other trade bodies. We look out for consultations that are coming out from the government and make sure that we put in responses that reflect the needs of our members. And we have a series of advisory boards where experts from within our membership, for example, experts on automation and technology or on the environment and net zero, will get together from different companies and feed into us what they want us to be saying to government on those particular issues.
So am I not looking at the future UK Minister of Logistics then? You just explained it perfectly. So if that is a role that the government requires, why not you? Why not you do it?
Look, honestly, I don't mind who it is, but I would definitely work with them because I think warehousing is, it's absolutely crucial. And we need to get more recognition for that.
Understand. In terms of technological transformation then, so maybe moving towards more automation from manual facilities, etc., how does your business support other businesses maybe moving from one to the other, that transition?
I guess there are some warehouses which are built from scratch with the idea that they're going to be automated, and we like to be able to showcase that so that people can learn from each other about how that's been done. I mentioned the visits for students that we've done. That's all been aimed at those sort of high-tech facilities. But I think it's also possible for other businesses to be able to adopt automation when perhaps they think that they can't. So I went to a 1960s warehouse as one of my tour of the 80 visits. And this was a place in Ashby de la Zouch where they were picking pet food. And it was an old building, but beautifully run, spotless. And they'd actually managed to employ some cobots for the picking operation.
Okay.
And what I learned there was it's really important to have a smooth floor. Robots don't like it if you make them trip over. Yeah. But as long as you've got a decent floor, the age of the building really shouldn't be anything that would hold you back. And so, the cost of labour's going up. It's become a bit more difficult to find people. Back before Brexit, more than 30% of our forklift drivers in the UK were EU nationals. Now that's less than 10%. Okay. So the availability of labour can be a challenge, and the cost of it. And if that's making the business case more powerful for automation, then even businesses that might have thought it wouldn't work for them in the past could perhaps look at it again.
And what do you think the other barriers are? There's other economical barriers as well, right? Obviously, the availability of capital expenditure, and potentially the movement of robots as a service and all of those buzzwords that are going around at the moment, or buzz opportunities. I mean, what's your thoughts on that? I mean,
well, I think one of the interesting things about the cost of capital's become more expensive, interest rates are up, all the rest of it. What that also means is that businesses like, your customers, your brands, they want to reduce the working capital in their businesses. And in order to do that, I think what's really important is to have fabulous stock accuracy, because one of the reasons why you end up with a proliferation of, holding too much stock is because you haven't got really accurate enough records about it. So I think this is an area where automation really comes into its own. In automated systems, it's more difficult to lose stock, to forget about stock, to end up with too much. It's easier to have good access to really high quality data. And then you can make sure that you've optimized that working capital, which, in a lot of cases, I would say that will pay for itself.
Yeah, it should do, shouldn't it?
Should do, yeah.
It should do. But it's still the leap, because it's the choice of automation though as well, isn't it? It's how do you guide people on do you guide people on what choices of automation might be better for their business? You have a consultative service where you can go into a house and think, this type of automation versus this type of automation.
Absolutely.
Do you offer those services as well?
So we ourselves don't offer that kind of advice. I mean, I'm always happy to go and have a look at someone's warehouse and have an informal chat about it, but we do signpost people to consultants that work directly with UKWA. And the general rule of thumb is that many of the consultants on our books will give half an hour or an hour's free consultancy to any UKWA member to kind of get them started. And then should they want a more bespoke consultancy service, then that would be a paid-for service. But in some cases, businesses then have got enough confidence to be able to go off and research it themselves. Sometimes it's just getting started that you need help with.
And it's the expertise. You've got to trust the expertise, haven't you? So ourselves, over the last maybe 20 years, we've opened loads of warehouses. We've changed the routing of it. We've built our own WMS. We've put some automation in there. We've taken automation out that hasn't worked. So we've got the right now, I guess, to look at other people's businesses. And we're doing it at the moment where we're a distributor of AutoStore, for instance, where we can take a look at someone else's business. We can actually have them co-inhabit in their own warehouse whilst building automation at the same time, whilst building the sprinkler system, the suspended ceiling, the flooring that you mentioned before. And we can look at their inbound processes all the way to their outbound packing and sortation processes for them. We offer that now as a service as well, which I suppose most people would think why has THG got the right to do that? But actually, we've been doing it for years.
I didn't know that about you guys.
Our business model now for THG Fulfil is ultimately, if we bring brands into our estate because they want to be asset light and plug into our ecosystem, or if they want total control like we've wanted for years, then if they want certain levels of automation or services, we can provide them as well. We can engineer, build, design, and I suppose be the principal contract manager for that AutoStore as well within their facility and plug into all of the software aspects with our WCS running the technology in the middle.
You're a big fan of the AutoStore system, aren't you? I mean, I think this one that we saw here today is one of the biggest ones in the world? Or?
Well, it's one of the biggest in the world, but it's got the highest output for D2C in the world, we're told by AutoStore, yeah. So, I mean, you're going from picking to order about 225,000 orders a day quite easily. And then when you're changing picking strategies to picking to batch, you go to 520,000. And as I mentioned before, when we put a T-sorter connected to that by the end of this year, we'll move that facility alone to 1 million unit output.
So it sounds like you're never standing still.
No.
I mean, you've been working with AutoStore for quite a while now, but you're always looking at pushing those boundaries and what can we do next. And I guess it's a combination of delighting the customer and getting the efficiencies.
Yeah, it is. I mean, first point is delighting the customer because that's your bread and butter.
Yeah.
The efficiencies are something that we look at on an obsessive basis. I think we made about 15,000 operational deployments in the last 12 months, about 45 a day. And that's across, it is a bit, obsessive.
It's a bit much.
Yeah, maybe it is, but, but we test and trial so many different algorithms, etc., and batching waves, etc. Just can we take seconds out of processes that gives us that efficiency gain? But that efficiency gain can equal a cost reduction, but it can also equal a delighted customer at the same time. So there's a real incentive to continue doing it. And it's a bit like what David Brailsford says, it's just marginal gains. How do you find the next second out of that corner in a Formula One race? How do we make the operator go from 20 seconds to 19 seconds? Is there something we can do that can take a second out? Because that compounds when you're doing 60 million units a year out of one facility. It can compound in cost and service. So it's just riddled in our DNA. It's a bit of a burden because it's never ending.
And do you find that some of those ideas come from the workforce on the shop floor?
Yeah.
Because I think one of the sort of misconceptions about warehouse work is that it's a bit tedious and dull. And warehouse workers that I talk to often say that they can see opportunities to do things better. And the fact that you can then implement those things and see the worthwhile
100%.
impact.
Yeah. There's a really easy feedback loop on those things. And to be honest, we encourage the management to do all of these tasks and stuff as well, so they can also see it. So during peak periods, when we have downtime, or humans still have breaks, of course, the robots still may move, but humans do need to eat. All the managers will jump on all the ports and they'll do all the work themselves whilst the teams are having lunch and will revert back. And then you just come up with so many different ideas of, well, why do we do this and why not do it in a different manner? Because unless you do it and you touch and feel it, you never learn it. But look, even from grassroots level of graduates coming in, whether it be an engineer or someone in the warehouse themselves, there's an easy feedback loop to provide an idea to the business. And to be honest, most of the best ideas now don't come from us. They have to come from the team because it's all technology that you're using on a daily basis. And all we do is we change the software to make their jobs, whether it be more enjoyable or more efficient. Yeah, consistently.
And sometimes safer as well. That's definitely something I've noticed across the period of my career. When I started out, it sometimes felt as though talking about safety was kind of...
No one wants to talk about it. It's boring, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's so important when you've got hundreds of people in one place.
Yeah.
It's paramount, absolutely paramount. And there's less manual handling, I guess, in a lot of our facilities these days. Yeah. But we still have a lot of bulk racking and still some other manual facilities out there. Poland, for instance, is not necessarily automated at the moment for us, so it's still quite traditional fulfilment, but more automation's going in there soon. But, it's a hybrid. We're always going to be a hybrid. So, so a lot of the ideas still come from the shop floor. Do we need more warehouses in the UK, for instance, or do we need to optimise the space? Some of the technologies that we work with is storage confinement and therefore high throughput at the same time. Let's be honest, warehouses can be beautiful to those who love them, but they're a bit of an eyesore as well because it's just a massive building in a field sometimes. But ultimately, we're trying to optimise the best use of our space rather than build the next warehouse. We'll need it at some point, of course we will. But ultimately, how do you think technology plays a role in the future warehousing estate in the UK for warehousing and manufacturing in the future?
I think warehousing plays a really critical role in the economy more generally. So it's difficult to imagine a business that doesn't rely on warehousing in some way. And that means for any kind of economic growth, you need to have the logistics to underpin it. So I think we hear a lot of good words about how, as a country, we want to become more productive. Productivity can be delivered through efficient warehousing. And then we also hear about how, we need to provide better levels of customer service. We've talked I mean, it's bread and butter to THG about how delivering great customer service comes from excellent warehousing. So I think it's absolutely crucial and critical.
So do you think the UK has the infrastructure to support future expansion of warehouses?
So I think we definitely need more warehousing. One of the things that we're finding in the property market for warehousing is that there's quite a lot of demand for brand new warehouses because of their sustainability credentials and because of the working environment that they provide for people to create that, attraction for the labour market. There was an interesting story on the BBC recently about a place called Nacton. So this is a village fairly near Felixstowe in Suffolk, and a big warehouse had been built, and it was overlooking some people's gardens. People said that they were terrified of it. People said that they'd been in tears and that it was a blight on the landscape. And this story attracted a lot of hits on the BBC website, to the extent that one of the BBC journalists came and interviewed me about it. And as I explained to them, real problem behind all of this is the failure of our planning system. And it's failing us in two ways. First of all, the amount of different stakeholders that you have to consult when you do a planning permission application is ridiculous. It costs hundreds of thousands of pounds in consultants to get all of these impact assessments done. And in fact, local residents ought to be a much more important stakeholder than some of these others that are on the statutory list. So prioritising the needs of local people is not something that I'm against, quite the opposite. I think it should be done better by the planning system. But secondly, there just isn't enough creativity in the system. The land in particular on this Nacton example was designated industrial land. The things that had been built there before were some industrial units, which were a bit smaller, and warehousing is needed. That's right near Felixstowe, which is a very critical container port. And planners don't have the flexibility to be able to, for example, use grey belt land or green belt. They have to use land which is designated industrial land. So if we need new warehouses and the only land you're allowed to use is industrial land, then that's what's going to happen.
How do we influence change there then?
Well, I think one of the key things that we've called for is to make sure that we have more funding for planning offices in local councils. And we have already heard some really positive rhetoric from the new government about cleaning up the planning system and making it easier to bring that level of creativity that I spoke about, to just be a bit more sensible about what we want to do with the land that we've got available. So a better framework of rules about land use, which I think is the direction we're headed in, but it's got to be backed up with the skills and capacity in local authorities to be able to pay proper attention to the needs of stakeholders and to actually process these planning applications. Do you know, in St Albans, they built a rail freight terminal and it took 17 years to get planning permission. That's just ridiculous.
Wow. So in terms of innovation then, of warehousing, urban fulfilment centres, multi-storey warehouses, etc. How do you see kind of the future design of warehouses? Do you see them being a smaller height, for instance? We've got a little bit of wasted space in ours because we have an AutoStore and a bit of oxygen above that. I mean, is there a certain design based on, the planning permission, everything you just mentioned before? Should we be designing warehouses very differently, or they clearly should just be tailored to each industry, right, at the same time? But do you think the design is going to change? I mean, it's just 4 walls and a roof and concrete floor at this moment in time. Do you think the design will change?
I think there may well be some changes in the design. Firstly, what I would say is we're seeing much more demand for small buildings and big buildings. I know that sounds a bit simplistic, but say, a historic warehouse building that's between 150,000 and 350,000 square feet, nobody wants them. That's not the sort of size, the optimum size people are going for. You want smaller ones, which are, close to where the consumer markets are for being much more agile and responsive. And then you want the economies of scale. For example, for automation, where you're seeing I think if you go back even a decade, there were probably a handful of warehouses over 1 million square feet. It's something like 70 or 80 now. So we're definitely seeing growth at that sort of high end of the bigger buildings. On the point about they're just, a pretty straightforward construction, I think that is true. But one of the places I want to mention is Dublin, where I saw the first wooden warehouse that we've got in our area. UKWA covers the Republic of Ireland as well as the UK. So the first 2 wooden warehouses were built in Austria. And this one was built in Dublin, and it was built as a kind of Meccano set. So it was created in Austria and then shipped over to Dublin. And despite all of that shipping, it still has a lower embedded carbon footprint than a traditional construction. So we might see some changes in the kind of materials that we use, because steel and concrete, let's face it, they're not great
for the
from a sustainability point of view. And that embedded carbon is quite a key part of the carbon footprint of a warehouse building. On the multi-storey point, we've seen some multi-storey warehouses. So there's a one called X2, which is near Heathrow. I don't think it's been especially successful, but it still operates. There's a fairly new one, been built, V Park, been built by Seagrow near Park Royal in London, and that's 5 stories of warehousing with goods lifts, but it's not really designed for high throughput. They're more like kind of industrial units, but vertically constructed. One of the ideas that I'm interested in, which I've seen overseas, but I think there's only one example in the UK, is where you actually create mixed use on a multi-storey. So where you might have a warehouse on the ground floor and then above it student flats. There's a shortage of that kind of development as well. I think culturally it might be a step too far at the moment, but I'm not saying we would never see that.
Maybe. I think some of the solutions that maybe AutoStore brought out is the smaller AutoStores, the PO100s to 600s, which basically fit into student accommodating flats. So ultimately, if you've got a load of postage going into, about maybe our head office, for instance, could probably benefit. We've got a post room, and the post guy is so busy because all the orders from THG, or if people aren't at home, get delivered to work, and we provide that service. But what we probably should do is put a PO100 in a room and put all the parcels in it. When people want to come and collect it, they just type a number in and it brings the parcel to them. So that technology is evolving as we speak.
I think you're right. And I was interested to learn that Vinted was started in 2008. I'm a recent convert to Vinted. Actually, I got these shoes on Vinted, second hand, which if
I
you'd
buy
have
a lot of
asked,
football shirts off Vinted as well.
but if you'd have asked the teenage me, are you ever going to wear second-hand shoes? I would have said, not on your life. But people do, don't they? So I guess part of what I'm saying is you do get cultural change. But also, I think the Vinted model is quite interesting because they are tending to use these post-box drop facilities, aren't they? So perhaps we're going to see a rise in that, and that could be an opportunity for AutoStore.
Absolutely, yeah, it is. And well, look, we've built one in the warehouse across the road, and that's now the UK showcase for PO100, and it's not for everybody, but it's quite a cheaper solution, but it's for smaller SMEs who don't need a £20 million AutoStore. It's quite simply, it's already integrated to Shopify, it's got QuickBooks, it's integrated with THG delivered from a courier management service, so you quite literally got all the integrations you need if you're on Shopify, for instance, and then ultimately you're plugging in your own fulfilment, which you do yourselves, and you've got 2 ports with robots doing it for you. You don't need 10 people to employ now to do your fulfilment. You've just automated it, even though you're still an SME.
And the level of training that those people need to be able to do the fulfilment is also more straightforward, isn't it? Because some of the decision making is being done automatically.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So on that subject then, what's your view on the adoption of automation across the UK? I read some of your white paper actually, and I believe, if forgive me if I'm wrong, like 10 to 15% of UK warehouses touches a form of automation or something along those lines. Is that right?
I think that might be a global figure actually. Okay. So globally, around 10 to 15% of warehouses are automated, but obviously that's telling us that's a high proportion of warehouses that haven't really got automation. Now it sort of depends. Would you class a forklift truck as being automation? I think the forklift truck was invented in about
only if there's no driver.
1915 or something.
Yeah.
Because the technology's increased, you can lift really heavy loads using electric forklift trucks these days. And of course, you can have renewable electricity, whereas the gas is a fossil fuel. Yeah. So we're seeing a conversion into more electrically powered forklifts. But that's not all. In addition to that, we're seeing huge amounts of data, and I know THG are very big on your use of data. And all of that relies on data centres, which are demanding a lot more electricity. And then alongside that, you've got the increase in automation. So all of the robotics that we've talked about, that's all electrically powered. And I think there's a big tsunami of demand that's going to be coming our way if we are to see a transition of HGV fleets away from diesel, perhaps to electricity, which I think, the jury's still out on that. Yeah. But we are seeing it for sure with van fleets that people are adopting.
And autonomous as well, I would imagine, because you think about miles travelled, because you've still
Yeah.
got a human, I mean, that technology still feels so far away. But in California now, you have taxis that are autonomous, and they take people from A to B very easily, and people
Yeah.
have got used to it in that area of the world. Whether we'll move towards it fully, who knows? But the technology is still evolving, and if that's the case, you may have less cars or trucks on the road, but the miles travelled would be higher, you would imagine,
Yeah.
because there's less stopping.
Then you're sweating the asset, aren't you?
Yeah,
That
exactly.
sounds like a
Yeah.
good idea.
May or
for
may not then be
efficiency.
safer, but it feels like the technology for that, from a highway perspective and safety perspective, for me personally, still feels quite a way off. Is there anything incoming now that we all need to get comfortable with and create change?
Well, there's a couple of things that I think we could hope for that would be positive. So one of them is that I think there are going to be some changes to the apprenticeship levy, and that's going to be really good for the manual part of work that still goes on in warehouses, because it doesn't often take a full year to learn how to work in a warehouse, and yet the legislation says that the minimum apprenticeship has to be a year long, and you've got to be learning for all of that time. It's not attractive to a lot of employers or to individuals. So a more flexible opportunity to use the apprenticeship levy for shorter courses and more targeted learning, I think, could be really beneficial for
With
our industry.
automation, though, as well, though, I mean, surely that's shortcutting the learning anyway, because automation kind of teaches you immediately.
Exactly,
what to do.
that on-the-job learning.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think you're exactly right. So, I think there'll be improvements in the apprenticeship levy, and we're really looking forward to that. The other topic I want to talk about is one that people sometimes think is going to be very boring, but you won't be surprised to hear, Tom, that I'm very passionate about, and that's business rates.
Okay.
So business rates is a kind of tax, a little bit like council tax that you pay on a domestic property, but it's for industrial properties or any commercial properties. The government collects about £25 billion of revenue every year out of business rates, and it would be £35 billion if it weren't for all the reliefs that they give. And an incredibly complicated regime of who is entitled to what reliefs has been built up over the years, and it really isn't fair anymore. So at the moment, as things stand, lots of other sectors, including hospitality and retail, are eligible for a wide range of different sorts of reliefs, whereas warehousing doesn't get any reliefs. And there's no chance that we're going to get any reliefs, because we've been lobbying on that for several years now and got absolutely nowhere. Where I think we might stand a better chance is for a more widespread look at how to reform that business rates regime altogether. So that's an area where I think we should really push, because I think it could be...
How, I guess, how do you push or do you pull? How do you do that?
Well, it's a bit of both. I mean, I suppose part of it is explaining the role that warehousing is playing within all of the different supply chains that support such a wide range of different businesses. That, energy costs are up, labour costs are up. If you're putting business rates up as well, that cost burden on businesses is really difficult to bear. And it is affecting all different kinds of businesses without enough kind of variety or without enough recognition of this. There seems to be a sort of belief that, well, they're big buildings, so they must be profitable, so let's tax them. Well, that's ridiculous. A lot of warehousing operations are quite low margin, and just because it's a big building doesn't mean that they should be entitled to charge a higher rate of business rates and not offer any reliefs. It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. In terms of how that can commercially impact brands and businesses, though, as well, if you continually putting rates up for warehousing, it's one of their it's probably the second biggest cost in their entire P&L, along with people and personnel.
Yeah.
So you keep doing that, their operating model has to shift. Normally the cost gets passed on to the consumer to absorb such costs, as you're mentioning now, but it can only stretch so far before the consumer stops buying, and businesses can go bust as a result of those changes.
Absolutely.
And then you end up with, in a vicious cycle where warehousing is empty. In terms of labour, how's the rising cost of labour impacting the UK Warehousing Association's members themselves?
Well, firstly, I would say that the rise in the minimum wage probably hasn't had the impact that you might expect, and that's because quite a lot of warehousing jobs are not actually minimum wage jobs. I suppose the only way in which that has had an impact is sometimes if somebody is paid not that much more than the minimum wage, then you kind of have to put that up in tandem in order, to sort of recognise their status within that hierarchy. But I think the national insurance change, which has only just come in this month, is likely to have a much, much bigger impact because that was a double whammy, wasn't it? It's not only that the rate of national insurance has gone up, but also that the number of people that are captured by national insurance has also increased with the floor dropping. So I think that's been a big impact and making labour much more expensive in some of our warehouses, which are very highly manual.
So how is the sector tackling labour shortages and the skills gap?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things that we're involved with. So firstly, there's a great program called Generation Logistics, which is all about showcasing the best kind of logistics careers opportunities that are out there. It's aimed at kids at school, but it's also being used by careers advisors, by job centres, by parents to understand more about the wide range of career opportunities that there is in logistics. And that includes quite a lot of warehousing jobs. So that's a scheme which is partly funded by the Department for Transport and then also by the industry. I think also alongside that, we've recently held a round table with the Department for Work and Pensions, who are based here in Manchester. And we talked to the Department for Work and Pensions about the role that the job centre plays in finding people who might be looking for work and connecting them up with work opportunities. And it feels as though warehousing is a bit of a gap there. A lot of job centres are not really familiar with the local environment of what warehouse employers are out there and what kind of jobs they might have available. And it cuts both ways. Quite a lot of employers have told us that they don't really think of the job centre as being a place where they could attract talented people from.
Well, it's multifaceted now as well, isn't it? Because you've ultimately, within our warehouses now, we've got business intelligence, data science, engineering, all of those things that you never had maybe even 15 years ago. I think there is a skill gap because trying to find the talent to come into a newly formed automated environment without having, to your point right at the beginning of our conversation, are we creating a skill gap because it's not taught in schools, it's not taught in universities, there's no maybe official qualifications for this industry, etc. Surely that's a challenge in itself, creating a skill gap.
It definitely is, but I think it also creates opportunity for people like you and me who illustrate the fact that you can go in at quite a junior level into warehousing and logistics more broadly, and there will always be an avenue for anybody, whatever your skill set is. I mean, I tend to think that logistics favours people who've got 3 sets of skills. So the troubleshooting that you talked about before, being interested in finding solutions to problems. You've got to be numeric in some way, so you don't necessarily have to be good at maths, but you've got to be comfortable with the idea that you measure things numerically, whether that's financially or operationally. And then there's also, it's really important to be a good leader of people, and I think that's in particular where you see some amazing growth stories about people's careers. We have some awards that we give, and one of the entries into our award for the Warehouse Manager of the Year this year is somebody who started as a warehouse cleaner and has made their way up to a warehouse management role. Because if you've got those leadership aptitudes and skills, then warehousing will definitely give you the opportunity to be able to do that. Where I think there has been a bit of a gap is with this gap in the qualification that I talked about, where transport has sometimes been seen as in some way a higher status part of the logistics world, and that warehousing, because there's not a qualification associated with it, is maybe in some way more lowly. And we've tried to address that because, a lot of the stuff we've talked about sustainability and automation, for example, you need some really meaty skills to be a very good warehouse manager, and that's the gap that we're hoping to fill with the qualification we launched.
It's a highly pressurised environment, though, isn't it, for a warehouse manager these days? Because you get pressures from all sides. You've obviously got the efficiency pressure, the cost pressure, the customer side. You've got probably brand pressure. If it's a 3PL, you've got external client pressure.
There's quite often not a right answer, because it's often about trade-offs, isn't it?
Yeah, it is always. Well, we were mentioning earlier in terms of inbound versus outbound and capacities, etc. Planning for peak. It ultimately it's an exact science. If you don't get it right, then ultimately one of them is going to be impacted by the other. If your supply chain is not. It's not got the right balance, for sure. I've got some fun and light-hearted questions for you.
Okay.
If you could invent one piece of futuristic warehousing technology that doesn't exist yet at all, what would it be?
So I've got an answer for this, but it's a bit convoluted. I think there are 3 things that need to be woven together. So one of them is, when a truck backs onto a loading bay, I want wireless charging for the electric truck, right? Wireless charging already exists, but I want it combined with 2 other things. So I want it linked up to solar panels on the roof. So this is renewable energy for the truck, right? And I want some kind of clever IT gizmo that uses AMPR to recognise that truck and charge the right person for the electricity. Can you invent me that?
We'll give it a go, Claire. But bloody hell, it's a good idea. If Hollywood made a film about warehousing or the warehousing industry, What would it be called, and who would play you?
So it'd have to be called #Where's Claire. That's my hashtag.
All right.
And ideally, I'd like to play myself, because if it involves going to visit warehouses,
Yeah.
that is my favourite thing to do.
All right.
But if it had to be somebody else, I'd pick like one of those strong female leads like Kate Winslet or something
Yeah.
like that.
Okay, very good, very good. So look, Claire, thanks very much for your time. It's been great speaking to you today. It really is a privilege to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.